Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into all 7 of the lightsaber fighting styles. In addition, we're going to be doing some of the ones that weren't commonly used in the Jedi Order. So, as the most ancient style of lightsaber combat, Shii-Cho was developed during the transition period from swords to lightsabers. Lightsabers were wielded in a manner similar to swords, so many of the maneuvers, such as attacks or parries, remained unchanged, as the key principles of the old sword fighting methods continued to be incorporated. The simplicity and persistent methods of the form led it to being dubbed the Way of the Sarlacc, and the Determination form. Shii-Cho swordplay was simplistic and raw, although masters of Shii-Cho such as Kit Fisto proved it to be deadly, too. In the hands of a master, the blade work was described as like watching water flow over the falls. However, less adept practitioners displayed much more basic and somewhat clumsy performance. In combat, Form 1 encouraged deliberate tactics, calling for a continuous step-by-step advancement, while cutting off the opponent's angles. Shii-Cho was specialized towards engaging multiple opponents, the wide sweeping motions being ideally suited towards attacking numerous adversaries. However, Form 1 was not as useful against single opponents, such as enemies that had complete mobility and could find a weakness in Shii-Cho's comparatively clumsy blade work. Shii-Cho fostered an emotionally heated mindset, which resulted in the considerable temptation to execute combat with lethal intent, requiring great restraint to exercise the form without going too far. Despite the pull to kill, the style was designed for the purpose of disarming without seriously injuring. As the most simplistic form, Shii-Cho was the first form taught to initiates within the Jedi Order. Form 1 training provided the basic knowledge of sword fighting principles and blast deflection skills that was required for practice of all the other forms. In order to teach students to draw upon the Force rather than rely on their senses, early level Shii-Cho blast deflect training was conducted with a blindfold, forcing the initiate to rely upon his or her instincts. Later, training was conducted through the use of sequences and velocities, the continuous repetition making the moves instinctive reflexes. These training regimens were carried over to all the following lightsaber combat forms, which used similar methods. Shii-Cho philosophy emphasized victory without injury, and as such, the Sun Dem, mark of contact, was traditionally employed by Form 1 practitioners. Keeping with the use of Sun Dem, one of the attacks utilized by Form 1 practitioners was referred to as the disarming slash, consisting of a strike directed at the opponent's weapon in an attempt to rip it out of their grasp. Alright, so Makashi was the most dueling-centric of the 7 forms, developed during an era where engagements with dark-side users and rogue Jedi became an almost routine activity. Form 2's primary purpose was to serve as a counter to the first form, Shii-Cho. Makashi relied on precision swordplay to counter the sweeping movements demonstrated by Shii-Cho, and a heavy focus on protecting one's weapon to avoid being disarmed. The primary goal of Form 1, Form 2 emphasized fluid motion and anticipation of a weapon being swung at its target, and so required very fluid movements of both the blade and the body. Timing, accuracy, and skill rather than strength were relied upon to defeat one's opponent. With a skilled practitioner, the results were deadly. Makashi users were often elegant, precise, calm, confident, to the point of arrogance, like Count Dooku, for example. Form 2 users were supremely confident in their chances for victory, and often looked so relaxed when they were fighting, they even appeared to be dancing at times. Makashi duelists also trained themselves to avoid enslavement to form. As such, enslavement opened the practitioner to be defeated by predictability and the unforeseen. Due to Form 2's emphasis on blade manipulation, and its many fluid one-hand moves, Makashi practitioners often wield lightsabers that were specialized for such use. The most prominent weapon for this purpose was the curved, hilted lightsaber. These weapons were used because the curved hilt fit better into the palm, granting better blade control and allowing for greater precision and strength. In addition to this, wielders often created highly decorated weapons and occasionally included blade guards, as shown with Dooku's lightsaber. The other, considerably rarer weapon type was the light foil, a specialized type of lightsaber used by the Mikrosa Order. Original light foils were built with small handles for exclusively one-handed usage, and were much better balanced than typical lightsabers, allowing for greater precision. So the original purpose of the Surisu form was to counter blaster-wielding opponents, as the previous combat styles focused on lightsaber dueling. Becoming the most defensive of the 7 forms, Surisu utilized tight moves, subtle dodges, and short sweeps designed to provide maximum defensive coverage, leaving the duelist less exposed to ranged fire. Over time, Form 3 came to transcend this basic origin, and become an expression of non-aggressive Jedi philosophy. Surisu utilized motions that occurred very close to the body, in an attempt to achieve near total protection and expend as little energy as possible while executing moves. Form 3 stressed quick reflexes and fast positional transition, in order to overcome the rapidity with which blasters could be fired. This technique minimized the body's exposure, making a well-trained practitioner nearly invincible. Form 3 involved preparation for prolonged battles where the user observed and learned as much as possible about their opponent's technique while engaged in combat. Also, by being more capable in lengthy battles, a Surisu user had the ability to gain control of a combat situation, creating multiple options for the Jedi employing the form. A Form 3 user could choose to kill, disarm, or even within reason, completely decimate their opponent when the time came. Truly focused masters of Surisu were very formidable due to their strong defensive technique. However, Form 3 merely facilitated survival rather than victory, usually. Form 3 initiates were more than capable of defending themselves from attack, but they needed a large amount of experience to learn how to effectively counterattack and entrap opponents. Masters had to maintain an incredibly strong focus on the center of the combat circle, since the defensive tactics of the form included guards and parries engaged very closely to the body. Notable masters such as Obi-Wan Kenobi could defend until their opponent made a fault and used it to their advantage. Jedi who left small lapses in their otherwise strong defense left little room to avoid injury. So Ataru was an aggressive combat form, relying on a combination of strength, speed, and agility. Practitioners of Ataru were always on the offensive, attacking with wide, fast, and powerful swings, constantly calling upon the Force to aid their movements and attacks. By allowing the Force to flow throughout their body, they could overcome their physical limitations, such as old age, like with Master Yoda, a notable master of Ataru, and perform amazing feats of acrobatics, such as somersaults and backflips, not only for attack, but also to evade the attacks and strikes of their opponents. The standard components of Form 4 focused on application of and smooth transition between the 3 axes of rotation in a 3-dimensional space. The Su-Ma, specifically the Jung Su-Ma, which means spinning, Tun Su-Ma, meaning somersaults, and En Su-Ma, meaning cartwheels. Those who used Form 4 could move at high speeds and could rain strong blows, jumping and attacking through the air. Powerful and quick spinning attacks could be utilized from all angles, either from ground or air. A master in Ataru combat could appear like a blur to their opponents, attacking from all directions, from the front, the sides, overhead, or behind. The Force not only allowed them to perform athletic feats not otherwise possible, but it also helped guide their actions and movements in combat. Obi-Wan Kenobi's backflip upon being kicked in the head is a perfect example of a Form 4 recovery, redirecting the kinetic energy. So Form 5 was created by Form 3 masters, who desired a more offensive style, since the defensive nature of Form 3 could lead to a prolonged fight, sometimes dangerously too. It evolved into an accepted style by combining the defensive maneuvers of Form 3 with the more aggressive philosophy and tactics of Form 2. Form 5 also required a higher level of physical strength than the other forms, due to its focus on complete domination of opponents. The form was developed alongside Form 4 at a time when the Jedi were increasingly called upon to actively keep the peace. Form 5 had 2 distinct variations, Cheyenne and Damso. Classic Form 5 Cheyenne was developed first, known as the Perseverance form. Cheyenne was designed to protect against enemy blaster fire and strikes without compromising one's ability to launch powerful counterattacks, with its focus against blaster fire. Cheyenne kept in mind that Jedi were often outnumbered by their opponents, and needed to defend themselves while retaining offensive capability. However, it lacked effectiveness against single opponents. Cheyenne practitioners were known to favor or at least regularly utilize reverse grips. Whereas Cheyenne specialized in blast deflection, the more advanced version, Damn So, focused on lightsaber dueling. Utilizing a combination of blocks and parries, a Damn So user maintained a proper foundation in terms of defense against both ranged and melee attacks. But rather than counter only when necessary, as per se, Surisu training, Damn So actively pressed the offense. Damn So placed a heavy focus on brute strength, utilizing wide, powerful strikes and parries. Power attacks from a Damn So user could even knock an opponent back, just through sheer kinetic force, throwing them off balance and leaving them vulnerable to further brute force strikes, and power blows that sought not just to penetrate an opponent's defense, but drive them back and leave them unstable. Notable masters of Form 5 include Anakin Skywalker, a master of Damn So, and Ahsoka Tano, a practitioner of Cheyenne. So, Nyman, the dual blade style developed by the royal of the Kashi Mur, were named for the dual triumvirate of the Kashi deities. The style was adopted by the Legion of Leto, a group of Darksiders responsible for the first schism of the Jedi Order. After the defeat of the Legion at the hands of the Jedi, Nyman was adopted by the Jedi Order, eventually being refined to the sixth form of lightsaber combat, referred to by the same name. Form 6 attempted to balance all elements of lightsaber combat, combining the techniques from forms that came before into a less intensely demanding combat style. In practice, Form 6 was a combination of older forms such as 1, 3, 4, and 5, and all of them in moderation. In the blending, much of the individuality was lost, but the strengths were spread evenly, and there was little weakness in it. Due to its jack-of-all-trades nature, the success of this form was largely dependent on the practitioner's intuition, improvisation, and creativity in combat rather than the response derived from the other forms. Medium style was based off of Nyman due to both of them being a combination of different forms. This broad generalization made Form 6 well suited for diplomats, as they could spend their time training in the areas of politics and negotiation instead of combat training. Notable users of Form 6 include Darth Maul, who used it in moderation, although mainly using Juyo, which is Form 7, and Anakin Skywalker, who scarcely used it due to him using Form 5 Damn So more often. Both of these practitioners of Form 6 happen to use it as an alternative to their aggressive fighting style, which is common for Form 6 users. Other users include Starkiller, Revan, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, although Obi-Wan barely uses it when dueling, but uses it against other opponents such as droids. Alright, so Juyo was described as the most vicious form of lightsaber combat, and was said to be filled with both fury and malignant grace. The form came to be known as the most difficult and demanding in all saber combat. Skilled combatants with Juyo were said by Jedi Master Vrook Lamar to be able to eviscerate a lone enemy. According to the Sith Lord Darth Traya, the form was both chaotic and erratic, with a heavy focus on offense. Jedi Battlemaster Sindrelig listed bold, direct motions as characteristics of Juyo, qualifying them as more open and kinetic than Form 5, but with a less elaborate appearance than Ataru. Drelig contrasted the tactics of Juyo as not nearly as graceful or linked as those of Ataru, instead referring to them as seemingly unconnected sequences. He also listed one of the strengths of the form as its unpredictability. The form was said to necessitate greater energy from Form 5 due to a broader wielding of a user's focus and deeper emotional link. Despite the challenges inherent in the use of the form, it could serve as a pathway to considerable power. Vapod was described as more than a fighting style. It was a state of mind that led through the penumbra of the dark side, requiring the user to enjoy the fight and relish the satisfaction of winning. The practitioner of Vapod would accept the fury of their opponent, transforming them into one half of a superconducting loop, with the other half being the power and darkness inherent in the opponent. The form was also mentioned with a cautionary warning by the Jedi that use of Vapod led the user perilously close to the dark side due to its focus on physical combat. Vapod required a constant and sizable stream of force use from the user, with a barely contained explosion of force power essential to all variations of Form 7, as another prerequisite for its use. The Form's attacks appeared to be unconnected, its motions seemingly unpolished to an untrained observer. The next one is called Strong Style, which is basically primarily focused on powerful strikes to batter through an opponent's defense, sacrificing speed for unrivaled power. The Strong Style covered great distance, and was virtually unstoppable unless the opponent responded in kind. Due to its utilization of strength and power, the Strong Style would cause more damage than any other forms of lightsaber combat. While its range and power made it especially efficient against single opponents who are armed with melee weapons, in lightsaber duels, the powerful strikes of this style could break through lightsaber blocks with relative ease. On rare occasions, when a lightsaber lock occurred, a user could usually win the lock by ripping the opponent's blade away, leaving him defenseless. This style was quite destructive, and if the practitioner was presented with an opening, it would almost always cause a devastating blow. Being based on slow, powerful swinging attacks, users of the Strong Style would often leave themselves open to counterattacks and open to blaster fire. The style could be disadvantages in one-on-one melee combat in terms of speed comparisons against faster opponents, although its range and penetration power could just as easily negate these disadvantages. It was weak against blaster shots, as the stance required that the user shift the blade quite a bit to cover the body. Thus, it was almost solely utilized in lightsaber combat. The next style is called Medium Style, which is an intermediate style between the fast and strong. The medium style was based on perfect equilibrium between speed and power. More often than not, the medium style was the first taught to a lightsaber duelist. It was simple in technique, yet more technical and powerful forms could be built from its foundation. The simplicity was both a strength and a weakness. It was an excellent style to fall back onto when nothing else worked, and could provide a respectable offense and defense. It could effectively combat blasters and hold less skilled lightsaber duelists at bay. However, more skilled gunslingers such as Boba Fett, or more talented lightsaber duelists like, say, Luke Skywalker, would very rapidly break a medium-style defense. The same holds true in offense, as a skilled duelist would rapidly destroy the user's momentum and counterattack. Another was Fast Style, which consists of short and quick motions with the blade that could be chained and combined almost indefinitely. This style allowed for multiple attacks at an extremely fast pace. Its obvious advantage was that it was efficient in one-to-one combat against slower opponents with lax defenses, or many opponents who were not wielding melee weapons, particularly when combined with force speed. Among the other styles, this style provided the best defense against blaster fire. In lightsaber combat, it was a powerful defense technique, as the user could create a very strong defense against multiple opponents or a single, stronger opponent. Relying primarily on speed and multiple attacks, the disadvantages of fast style were equally obvious. First, its use of fast strikes limited the amount of power that was put into a blow, making it easy for a strike to be parried or overpowered. Second, its range was considerably shorter, making it less effective as offense against a wide spread of multiple opponents. And third, the fast style's defenses could quickly be broken through if an opponent was much more physically powerful than the user. Since the blade was kept so close to the body, a strong, cunning opponent will simply hammer the user's blade in the hopes that the practitioner would tire and leave themselves open. There was also fighting material in the Jedi Temple for forms such as Sokan or mounted lightsaber combat. Also, Jedi were encouraged to develop hybrid fighting forms, or to study alternative fighting styles to back up their primary. Such fighting forms have taken many shapes, from simple personalized variations of other styles to advanced hybrid fighting forms. For example, Naiman practitioners were encouraged to study Surisu, the pure root of Form 6. Obi-Wan Kenobi began studying Surisu to compensate for the defensive weaknesses of Ataru, though he eventually switched entirely to the former. However, other duelists discouraged such hybrid methods, a notable account being Dooku. While Dooku advocated for the application of unorthodox maneuvers, he focused exclusively on makashi and referred to hybrid duelists as mere dabblers, lacking mastery. He even went as far as to smear Jedi battle masters for this, maintaining that their attempts to master multiple combat forms was taking on too much, and that they could still be beaten by a specialist in a single form. One of the facts supporting this viewpoint was the death of Battlemaster Sindrelig at the hands of Darth Vader, a Form 5 specialist. Vader himself would later become a hybrid duelist sometime after being placed in his suit, integrated techniques from all 7 lightsaber styles into his personalized Form 5 variant, and switched back and forth between styles to suit the situation. Now into some of the lesser-known fighting styles like Trispzest, Trikata, and Sokan. So, Trispzest is a combination of elements of Form 7 and traditional security aerial dueling. Trispzest was a type of aerial lightsaber combat originally developed by the airborne force-sensitive Majestrix of Sky, Karis. Trispzest meant heart palpitation in the Sikritic language, which would allow the combatant to utilize the advantages of flying in battle against grounded units, whom the security would derogatively refer to as walkers. In this style, emphasis was placed on the use of Shii-Cho technique to decapitate walkers. It had many advantages, but one fatal weakness, as the combatant was open to attacks from directly below him or by ground units. Kyle Katarn took advantage of this weakness when, dropping to the ground and lunging his lightsaber upwards as Maw passed over him, he injured Maw during a duel on Ruusan. The next is Trikata. Trikata was based around the unique ability of lightsabers to turn on and off, activating and deactivating the blade in the heat of combat to slip past enemy defenses, or trick them into overextending themselves. Philosophically, Trikata involved practical combat and deception, rather than the more traditional single-minded and determined tactics that were the hallmarks of the Jedi and the Sith. Sith had difficulty applying this style, as their power came from passion and rage rather than level-headed technical ingenuity, and the Jedi refrained from this style due to their unwillingness to rely on deception. Also, deactivating one's lightsaber during combat offered greater control over the Force, due to its removed distraction. The next is called Sokan. For the most part, Sokan was a principle of lightsaber combat rather than a true form, developed by the ancient Jedi Knights during the Great Hyperspace War. Sokan teaching revolved around using the environment itself to gain a tactical advantage in combat. Sokan was based on outmaneuvering opponents, using quick tumbling and jumping movements to close the distance and facilitate swift strokes towards the opponent's vital areas. Terrain was heavily relied on for this purpose, and allowed for great speed and mobility, and also facilitated self-defense. Prior to the Clone Wars, Sokan practitioners integrated highly kinetic elements of Ataru with their ancient Sokan techniques to create a blend of styles that relied upon agility. The next was mounted lightsaber combat. In this type, the duelist was limited to fighting one-handed, as the other hand was needed for steering the mount. As the duelist would have a height advantage over the opponent, attacks while mounted typically consisted of low lunges and diagonal slashes and arcs. The prime advantage of this type of fighting is the high vantage point and the speed offered by the mount, though conversely the duelist had to devote effort towards protecting and controlling the mount. Telekinetic lightsaber combat was the art and practice of wielding one's lightsaber with force-based telekinesis. It was extremely difficult and required great aptitude in such applications of the Force. The primary advantages of such a fighting form were obvious. Range ceased to be an issue, and the option of wielding numerous lightsabers simultaneously became viable. The most basic application of telekinesis in lightsaber combat was the saber throw. Using the Force to guide the lightsaber's arc through the air, users could throw their lightsabers in a boomerang fashion, cutting apart obstacles and surprising foes. More adept users of a technique could hurl their lightsabers across great distances, making mid-air course corrections, or simply allow their lightsaber to hover in place. Dun Mok was a traditional Sith tactic, based around psychological warfare. Primarily, the practitioner relied on taunts that exposed an opponent's inner doubts and weakness, disrupting their concentration. Proper execution of Dunmok called for great patience and control, a rare trait among the Sith, especially those of earlier eras. One of the finest demonstrations of this technique was in Darth Bane's defeat of Sirak during their time at the Sith Academy on Korriban. He demonstrated the need for patience by drawing out the battle to take advantage of Sirak's lack of endurance, and exhibited fine control by withholding from striking an early killing blow as Sirak's form began to slip. Rather than settle for a quick victory, Bane sought to completely destroy Sirak, allowing the tantalizing closeness of victory to fuel his rage, unleashing it in a powerful blow that disarmed Sirak, ending the duel. Form Zero was not actually a form of lightsaber combat, but rather an ethical principle. It was an expression of the idea that the Jedi should know when to use their lightsabers, and when to withhold from resorting to force, and instead find an alternative means of solving a problem. This idea was defined by Jedi Master Yoda to address the need of the Jedi to restrain themselves when tempted to use aggressive negotiations, and instead to use another well-developed Jedi skill, such as the Jedi mind trick. This was a method used to arrive at a solution without resorting to violence. Lusma was an obscure lightsaber technique, and one of the fighting forms that Count Dooku trained Grievous and his IG-100 Magna Guards in. Beyond the fact that one of these initiates used Lusma to counter a Surisu move, next to nothing is known about this style, so on to the next one. Summa was the use of rotation in the Jedi Knight's form of lightsaber combat. It was composed by three forms. One, the Tunsumma, was the use of somersaults in combat. Another, the Ensumma, was the use of cartwheels in combat. So now let's go into some weapon-specific fighting forms. So due to the incredible variations in lightsaber technology and the various specialized weapons available, fighting and training methods for the use of these various implements were required. Most weapon variants were fairly minute changes in the size and shape of the lightsaber hilt, with the effects on combat being negligible. Curved hilt lightsabers and light foils allowed for greater precision and easier one-handed wielding, while long-handle lightsabers allowed for improved leverage and power. Dual-phase lightsabers allowed for rapid changes in blade length, and could be used to surprise enemies, but required no dedicated methods of specialized training beyond personal familiarity. However, the other variations on armament, such as double-bladed lightsabers or the wielding of dual blades, required intense specialized training due to the difficulty in using such weapons. The Jarkai style was developed by Yovshin swordsmen, was named for a city on Atresia. The city of Jarkai was also the site where the original Jarkai dueling sabers were crafted. These weapons were utilized by the Yovshin and were designed for the express purpose of being dual-bladed. Naiman, the dual-blade style developed by the royal Masheredos of the Kashi Mur, was named for the dual triumvirate of the Kashi deities. The style was adopted by the Legions of Leto, a group of Darksiders responsible for the first great schism of the Jedi Order. After the defeat of the Legion at the hands of the Jedi, Naiman was adopted by the Jedi Order, eventually being refined into the sixth form of lightsaber combat, referred to by the same name. Both styles predated the invention and usage of lightsabers, but being designed to be practiced with swords, they were easily adapted. In addition, the word Jarkai became a blanket term for dual-bladed combat, in general leading to the birth of the term Jarkai tactic, which was simply to employ two blades in combat, regardless of whether one had received training of any dual-bladed fighting style. Dual-blade fighters, whether classical Naiman duelists or individuals applying the Jarkai tactic, were able to maintain a strong offense, as the speed of attack that two blades allowed would overwhelm most opponents. A typical maneuver was to continually attack with one blade while relying on the other for defensive coverage, ensuring that the duelist could keep up his guard even as he was attacked. However, it was common that both blades be used for offensive purposes, keeping up a continuous wave front assault. Though a complete fighting system in and of itself, Jarkai was easily adapted to other styles. After beginning her tutelage under Darth Tyrannus, Asajj Ventress quickly applied Makashi techniques to her practice of Jarkai. As Makashi was Tyrannus' favorite form, Jedi Master Luminara Unduli was able to recognize his training techniques and Asajj's fighting abilities, stating as much. Mace Windu also infused Jarkai tactics into his own Vapod style, while on a mission on Harun Kal, his former apprentice Depa Billaba doing likewise. So what do you guys think of the different types of lightsaber combat? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.